Hey everybody, Spaz here, and it's time to feast upon another bucket of comic corn. In this episode, I am going to show you where comics meet music. Not just regular music, I'm generally referring to pop music, rock and roll. Reading comics is much like listening to music. You know, it serves as escapism. You know, shuts out the hatred, the negativity, the politics, everything else. Allows you to just calm down, open your mind, relax, float downstream, and all that stuff. And today, in this episode, I am going to show you where rock and roll has entered the world of comics. Lots of fun stuff here, but I'll make it quick. And remember, this is not everything. This is just what I have, what I've been able to get. And it's a whole lot of fun. But what I wanted to start off with was this fantastic issue of Back Issue. And this is just filled with stories about where comics and music have come together. You know, this is a story of Kiss doing their, you know, drawing their blood for their comics and you know, talking about all the you know, different comics out there. There's an article about Paul McCartney and how he came up with Magneto and Titanium Man. There's bits about Partridge Family and of course Flash Gordon there. You know, everyone knows Queen to the soundtrack to Flash Gordon. But it's a great, if you can find that issue, I'd say order it because it's very interesting and you can't get this online in terms of, you can't read it online. I don't think so. But I would recommend that you actually own that magazine because it has a whole lot of information, and I love information. So I'm going to start, and I'm just going to show you some issues where music has entered comics. This one I'm going to start off with. Well, I mean, let's put it this way: I'm generally going to focus on pop music, but other music is going to enter into it. You know, even music that hurt Superman. You know, when Lois and Lex Luthor played music that would hurt Superman, and that's really kind of sad. But that's all that I'm going to show you on that one. But here's an interesting thing: there's an anthology series called Ice Cream Man. Every issue has a different story. This one here, obviously, you can tell it's going to be music related. Strangely enough, if you've read the story about the last days of Bill Haley, this basically takes that story and then takes it off into a weird direction. But you can tell, like in the first couple pages of this, that they are basing this character on Bill Haley and his final days. So if you can track that down, that's a fun one. You can always read about rock stars. I don't know if that's Slash or Jimmy Page, but I haven't read it. I just bought it because it was called Rock Stars. It was 25 cents. Here's something interesting. Comics have always been popular, and Casablanca Records wanted to get into the comics business. They wanted to bring disco music into the comics world. They wanted Marvel to create a disco-based character that they could eventually turn into movies. Well, Dazzler was that character. And this was actually created at the insistence of Casablanca Records. And Dazzler was going to be a star going to put out music, movies, and going to be a big disco star. Well, disco died pretty much when this started coming out, even though, you know, you'll see there were disco issues. I love this cover. Looks like a record, although the record never existed. But, you know, I mean, Dazzler did meet up with Luke Cage and Iron Fist, Heroes for Hire, Spider-Woman, Galacticus, the Hulk. And this is all a disco star. I mean, the character itself is a disco star, disco singer. Dr. Doom. And just recently, in the last few, I guess just a few months ago, they revived Dazzler for one issue. Sadly, she was no longer disco. She was more like a punk, which means, judging by that picture, she was probably auto-tuned. And we all know, I mentioned them a little while ago, we all know that Kiss has had many different comics. This is one that came out. This is issues 1 and 2 that came out in 2000. They just had a new series that just came out this week. And they had comics basically in the last 40 years, there have been Kiss comics, all different series, Psycho Circus and stuff like that, but I never really got into it, but I happened to pick those up from my friend Ronnie, so I wanted to show all of you. Let me see. But it's not just rock and roll, too. It's the Lennon Sisters, the great vocal quartet, and eventually their brothers and cousins formed a band called Venice, who are still around playing music today, but Lennon Sisters. Here's the back of that cover, Lennon Sisters. Dr. Boogie. Can't complain about Dr. Boogie. Look, anybody jumping out of a spaceship with musical notes, and his name is Dr. Boogie, I have to pick it up. And everybody knows that I'm a big 80s fan. So, because of that, I picked up a series, or actually the first 3 issues, of a series by a bunch of superheroes called The New Wave. And is it based on New Wave music? No. It did come out in the 80s, but has nothing to do with, like, cool New Wave music. But I like the fact that it says New Wave, and I'll probably eventually put the first issue up on the wall just to have it. But speaking of New Wave, everybody knows also that I love people like Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe and all that stuff. And boy, was it delightful when I grabbed this issue of Captain America, and one panel shows characters discussing Bruce Springsteen and Elvis Costello as produced by Nick Lowe. And I think that's pretty, it's just one panel. That's it. It's not like the whole issue is devoted to it. One panel. But I find it fascinating. You know, the fact that music just entered just a little bit in there. Just, some people probably didn't even get it back then. Or people reading the comics and going, who's Nick Lowe? I know who Nick Lowe is. And I think you do too. If you're watching this video, you're either a comic person you don't know, or you watch my PowerPop videos and you do know. And here's one I recently picked up. I've been looking for this for a little while. This here actually has a few panels where SpiderMan is told to recite Shakespeare. And SpiderMan doesn't know Shakespeare, so he asks if he can recite Elvis Costello. And he's given the approval, and he starts singing Oliver's Army. And I'll feature that right now. And again, that's all there is. It's just those couple panels. But again, I love it when my worlds collide. There's a lot of Archie comics out now, and they tend to feature, different scenarios. There'll be Archie 1941 or Afterlife with Archie. But there's one series where he tends to meet bands from past and present. One of the bands he's met is the Ramones, and the Ramones are busy helping Archie get a deal. But see, Archie's a Ramones fan, as you can tell there. Archie's dad is, actually. And then he turns Archie on to the band, and the band gets involved in sort of travel back in time. And during that time, while they're talking in the audience, the Talking Heads are playing. There's no reference to the Talking Heads, but you can tell it's them, especially by the lyrics and what the lead character says. Another band that Archie has met is Blondie. I got this variant. This is the Parallel Lines. There's also one that has E to the Beat. Same with the Ramones one. There's variant covers on that. I like that one because that's the Rocket to Russia cover. This right there is a fantastic Blondie Parallel Lines album parody. And since Archie's bubblegum, of course he did have to go back in the past and meet the Monkees. There's also variants on this as well, but this is Archie and the Monkees. And bubblegum is always good, isn't it? Bubblegum pop. Speaking of bubblegum pop, One thing that I haven't been able to find that I still look for, but it's probably pretty doubtful, is there is a Cowsills, one issue of a Cowsills comic. But I'll settle for second best. Partridge Family. I've got a Partridge Family comic here. I guess you could also say that that's a 70s TV series, but I look at it as music. And to go along with that, I Love You. I picked this up because it has a poster of David Cassidy, right? Well, the poster of David Cassidy must have been drawn by an 8-year-old blind girl. And excuse me if that if calling someone an 8-year-old blind girl is offensive to anyone, but there's your David Cassidy poster. I don't know. I think it looked more like Peter Tork. And here's another interesting one. This is a comic called What If Marvel Went Metal with Ghost Rider? And this is the variant cover. Looks like it has a action figure. It's not a real action figure, but it has exactly what it says. What if Marvel went metal with Ghost Rider? And it's fun, and but I'm not going to show it to you because we don't have that much time. Author Mike Barron created a character called Nexus, and this isn't particularly music related, but Nexus had a favorite band, and his favorite band was called the Mez, and they actually have their own comic, which I find fun and interesting. Now, let's get into the good stuff. Not that any of that wasn't good. This is the good stuff. This is the stuff that people have been waiting for. Everyone knows I love the Beatles. I will even buy a Jerry Lewis comic just because it mentions the Beatles and Rolling Stones on the cover. If you can see that. It is a music-related issue. But I love when I read comics from the era, from the 60s, when the Beatles were in existence, when they were around. These comics came out, and they managed to scoot the Beatles in. Usually they misspell it, Beetles. And they don't call them by their name. But you can always tell it's the Beatles because there's usually a yeah, written above the characters. For example, I have a hardcover of Herbie, an odd character. But Herbie's kind of a weird little character that sort of stumbles around with his lollipop and gets into trouble and saves people. But there's a segment in here, which I will feature right now, that features the Beatles and Herbie getting up on drums. I don't have that actual issue, but that issue is featured in this hardcover book. So Herbie is one of those things that a lot of people don't know, don't remember, but I didn't know about Herbie until years later, and then I was happy to find that book. Speaking of books, here's another book, Beatles. The Fifth Beatle. This is a book about the life of Brian Epstein. And this is a hardcover. It's also available in paperback, or soft cover, if you want to put it that way. But it is the story of Brian Epstein. They are actually turning this into a movie or maybe even a mini-series or something. But that's out there. That's always fun to go through. And it reads like a biography. Of course it's animated and fun. But and it does have a dark side, as we all know that Brian Epstein did. I'll even buy things. I mean, if they're in like the 50-cent bin or the 25-cent bin or whatever, I'll even buy comics that just mention the yeah, like I was talking about. Here's the yeah. Because you know that came out during the Beatle time. And that was, in the early 60s, that's how everybody knew the Beatles. If it said yeah. Even though they only had one song, She Loves You, where they sang yeah. But for some reason that stuck with them in the 60s. I don't think so much by the time Sgt. Pepper came out. Yeah. Here is something, we're getting into the delicious stuff here. Okay? Here is Strange Tales featuring Doctor Strange. And look it over here. The Thing and the Human Torch meet the Beatles. Can you believe that? This is a delight, a pure delight. You are not going to find this too easy, and when you do, you are going to hold it against your face like that because it's warm in the room and that's cold. And here's some great stuff. I have a friend in Texas who was surprised the heck out of me. His name is Alan. He surprised the heck out of me because I'll post stuff on Facebook and I'll tell people about, how important comics are and how important music is. And then when my worlds collide, how amazing it is and how I want to track down those particular issues. Well, he sent me 3 out of the blue. He sent me 3 comics that blew my mind, and I can't thank Alan enough. Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. Look at that right there. The red-headed beetle of 1000 BC. That's Jimmy Olsen. Can you believe that? That's pretty amazing there. Here's another one. Remember how I keep talking about the yeah? Well, this is spelled different. But look at that. Superman up there doing the Krypton crawl. I think we all know it probably as the twist. But that's pretty darn interesting. I think it's fascinating, and I absolutely love it to death. But here is in my opinion, the creme de la creme. This isn't the icing on the cake. This is the cake. This is the cake and the candles and those swirly roses and some of the swirly little edges and preferably a whipped cream based frosting as opposed to a buttercream frosting because that can taste kind of plastic. But this is, and I can't thank Alan enough for those 2, Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, and this is Batman 222, and look at that. It's a total reference to Paul is Dead. They're looking at an album cover and they're trying to find which member of this band is dead. The band The Beatles is not listed, but you know who they're talking about. That is right. Batman 222 in my possession. Thank you, Alan. And that is it. I know that there's tons more music stuff out there, but I really wanted to share this, especially those last few there, because it's an amazing thing when you can find so much enjoyment when so much crap is going on around you. I know it's difficult for me to share that excitement with you or for you to feel it, but that's why I make these videos, so you can see that there are things out there that excite others, and maybe they might excite you. Maybe you might want to investigate some of these music-related comics. I'd like to thank Alan for sending me those comics. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'd like to thank Dave, Robert, Frank, and Trina from World's Best Comics, and I'd like to thank JW, Jared, and Brian from A1 Comics. And that's it for this episode of Comic Corn, and we will smell you later.